So when we think about like this process, then right, we can think of like a lot of different issues that pop up, right? So more often than not, the chief problems that come up are related to use of force. We also have issues related to illegal searches and seizures. And, we also see instances where we're also just dealing with rude police officers. So with this, right, we see that there are, quite a few problems that come up, right? And some of these could be, if we think about use of force related issues, right? It could be K9 units bite people too often. That was in the Washington, D.C. one. It's kind of a problem, right? When you're just like, you show up and dogs are biting like 70% of the time. It's not a good look. You're like, why are you directing your dogs to bite people? You also have rude people, maybe they're profiling. That also gets to related to illegal searches and seizures or disproportionate searches and seizures. You also have issues, that are some kind of, that maybe are like investigations are not taken seriously, such as like in Missoula, Montana, where sexual assault investigations were just like not handled at all, and that's kind of a problem. So these are intended to address a whole host of issues. So in this instance, then, in this case, they're used a lot of different things, right? So usually the DOJ is going to make a lot of recommendations, right? It usually involves new policy. It's oftentimes leads to a new police chief. There's a lot of turnover associated with this, but it doesn't necessarily mean a new chief is coming in, right? So there's new policies. Officers have to be retrained, and whatever issues are set for compliance according to the court monitor, right? The goal is to have a 5-year agreement in place where the last 2 years. So the last 2 years are in full compliance. So there's no issues ongoing. So there's no unveiling problems, right? Oftentimes this doesn't happen. This is often the goal, but sometimes there are some growing pains associated with like this change in process, and so that it can be taken out for years. Sometimes it's 7 years, sometimes it's 9. Other times, like I think in Detroit, it was like 14. Right? It takes like a really long time. So, success is going to be defined in each agreement, right? But really, success is, creating and sustaining good policing practices. Holding yourself accountable. A lot of times, like you'll see in, the agreements that are posted with the federal government, is that they'll be like, hey, you have to institute a complaint system, and you have to have an investigation process to investigate those complaints, and you have to have a penalty system, right, that meets some standards. Sometimes the agreements that they make are going to be like, you haven't updated your policy book since 1974. You should do that. And that can require a lot of book. That was true in Warren, Ohio, where they had to like update it because they hadn't updated it in like 40 years, right? Which is interesting, is that you think nothing has changed in the last 40 years and you've never updated it. How curious. So things like that happen and are worthy of consideration, right? So the other aspect that can come in, right, so is that once this comes in place, right, the court monitor is going to make some reports, and we'll do that. So based off the court monitor, based off the judicial decision, they will say that, okay, you did meet the terms of the agreement, you're free to go, or we'll make a recommendation to back off then. So that's usually what things are happening. These issues also deal with issues related to people in crisis, like Seattle, Washington, for mental health related issues or homeless populations. There really are quite a few issues and problems that can be addressed by this, right? Now, sometimes, right, we often have, growing pains. Depending on the cooperativeness of the police department, they may not like the recommendations. The Department of Justice is usually going to be like, "Hey, you wanna help us out?" And the police department is like, "No." But then the DOJ is like, "Okay, well, you have to do all this stuff, but we can't do that." Well, sorry, right? Some of the growing pains, though, are that if you are cooperative, you do participate in investigation, you can have more of a say in the changes you're going to be required to make. But some of the changes that end up happening that sort of make it kind of difficult is that these agreements are kind of stiff, and any kind of change has to be negotiated in a court of law. So the judge has to. So if you were like, this process isn't working for us, can we change it, please? You have to do that in a court of law, and that can be kind of hard to do because it takes drawn out, right? These are also very expensive for the police department. The DOJ does not sponsor, any kind of reformation. They just say you gotta fix your shit. They don't pay for the monitor. They don't pay for the investigation. They don't pay for you to write new policies. They don't pay for you to retrain your officers, right? And this often leads to some resistance by the police departments because they're like, "Dude, we're broke. Like, you want me to make these changes? You ain't giving me any money. I can't make these changes. Screw you." And that's a problem too, right? Because we got to have instances where you can actually afford to do it, right? So that can draw it on. You'll also have instances where officers, are kind of like kind of blind, and what ends up happening is that they don't know whether to believe their commander. They don't know what the new policy is. They're confused because they've been trained and retrained so many other times. They don't know if the changes are working. They feel like they've lost agency or control or power in their job, right? So that's kind of, a symbol of, disenfranchisement. And that's not really good either, right? But it is something to keep in mind is that, you do have to deal with line officers, and, you have to probably should consult and adjust based off of what the officers think. Not everything, right? But, but it should probably happen, right? But the end goal is to limit and redress police misconduct, right? So that is the chief goal related to this, and we will